Welcome to another episode of the Plutus Awards Podcast. Our community is filled with hundreds of stories from creators and entrepreneurs just like you. And through the show, we share these stories of challenges and successes, from bloggers to podcasters to writers, speakers, and more. Today's guest is Emily Guy Birken, a former educator, lifelong money nerd, and a Plutus Award-winning freelance writer who specializes in the scientific research behind irrational money behaviors. Her work has appeared on the Huffington Post, Business Insider, MSN Money, and the Washington Post Online. She's also the author of the 5 Years Before You Retire, Choose Retirement, Making Social Security Work for You, and End Financial Stress Now. We talk about how Emily had to prioritize her work when she got a book deal with her co-author, Joe Saul-Sehy from Stacking Benjamins, what it took to enforce her boundaries, and the biggest thing she learned when communicating with her family about her career. Let's dive right into my conversation with Emily Guy Birken. Hey Emily, welcome to the Plutus Awards Podcast. Really excited to have you on today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Excellent. So I am really curious about your work priorities in 2019 versus 2020. And of course, we all know the pandemic hit. It's still affecting us in 2021. But I'm curious about what you would and would not have prioritized in terms of childcare and your work.
Mm-hmm. So I have two sons. They are currently 7 and 10. And when the pandemic hit in 2020, I had kind of a major career milestone in that I'm working on a book with my friend Joe Saul-Sehy of the Stacking Benjamins podcast. And we sold it in 2020. To a major publisher. It went to auction. It was like something I've been wanting my whole life is to do that. I've written books before, but did that unagented. It was kind of for small advances, relatively small potatoes, put it that way. I hope my previous publisher isn't listening. So, but this was a big deal. Now, we signed in June of 2020. Now, that made things way different in terms of my work and how childcare breaks down within my family. So if everything had been the same, but in a year earlier, I would have been just freelancing in 2019, not working on a major project. And I've been freelancing since November 2010 and have taken time away before. When my younger son was born in 2013, I took some time away. And part of the reason why I started this career was so that I could be the primary caregiver for my kids. I started the freelancing when my elder son was 2 or 3 months old. And it was specifically so I could continue staying home. So if everything had happened in 2019, I probably would have put pause on all of my regular freelancing clients and said, I got to focus on my kids and done the homeschooling thing. I would have done it badly. I will point that out. I am a former teacher. I taught high school English for 4 years before I became a writer. And that does not translate to teaching your own kids when they are in kindergarten and third grade. So for that reason, I'm kind of glad, because it was clear that when I tried to do some supervision of the kids that I was not set up for that. So because it hit in 2020, it just wasn't possible. Joe and I had a deadline for our manuscript. I had to be working on it. This was not an optional thing. And so it felt a little bit more like how people with traditional jobs felt during the pandemic, because you had to continue working them if they were the sort of one that allowed you to continue working. You weren't furloughed or laid off. So this was a little difficult in our family, because we're used to me being the go-to parent. We're used to me taking care of drop off and pick up for school, for, helping make lunches and all of those things. My husband is a very involved dad. He's a great father, but he works an 8 to 5 that is often sometimes to 6 or 7:30 in the morning. So that meant we had to do some shuffling. Because he has been working from home, that has been easier. So if this pandemic had hit and he'd been required to continue going into the office, I don't know what we would have done, quite frankly. But it really there was a point in the summer where I went for a socially distanced walk with a friend of mine who has 4 children. So I like in awe of how she does what she does. And she was talking about how she didn't know for the coming school year how she could continue working and supervising the kids, and her husband was working and all of that. And we were both like, I kind of wish I could quit, but I can't. And like, I don't wish that. Like, it's not that. I wanted to clone myself so I had more time is really what it was. And so trying to figure that out. And I feel in some ways grateful that things worked out the way that they did, that if the pandemic had hit in 2019, or if the book deal had not come until 2021, I would have taken a step back. And I think that would have been worse for me, would have been worse for our family, would have been worse for my kids.
Why do you think it would have been worse?
So having my work has been one like place of stability for me. So I love what I do. I really do. And I know that I'm lucky that way. I know not everyone can claim that. And though there are times where I'm like, oh my goodness, why do I do this? Which I believe everybody does, even if they love their work. Knowing that I had work to do and I'm writing about money. So I feel like I'm putting helpful things out into the world, particularly during the pandemic when everyone is feeling overwhelmed. So like that was also a source of pride for me and stability when like I didn't know how to be with my kids 24/7, and having something that defined me outside of being a mom and a wife, outside of the consistent, like you need to brush your teeth, you need to sign on to Zoom on time, you need to make sure your socks are clean, all of those. Having something where I am a professional gave me that distance and that space to be able to come back to being a mom and not be so frustrated with my kids. So if I were trying to, I'm not cut out to be a fully stay-at-home parent, even though I work from home and did that specifically so I could be the primary caregiver. It's just not in my nature to not also have some compartments where I feel like a full grown-up outside of being a parent.
Makes sense. I am curious, if you weren't writing the book with someone else, so Joe, would you have maybe negotiated the deadline for your manuscript?
That's an excellent question, and it's hard to answer. And here's why it's hard to answer. Joe and I make a great team. So he brings a lot of the stuff that I don't necessarily have. Like he has that platform, he has the podcast, he's got like all kinds of marketing experience and things like that, which made the publisher really sit up and take notice. And then I have the long career of writing. I can show a consistent ability to write books that sell. The book we're writing is called Stacked, and it's going to be a humorous guide to money. And so between us, we have the banter and the laughter and the fun. So it's hard to imagine being in this situation without him as my co-writer and partner. So honestly, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how it would have gone down. I suspect I would not have barreled through with hoping to get a contract in 2020 if I had the same other situation where I had the agent who's gung-ho about the project. I probably would have been like, let's hold off because I'm a little overwhelmed. Whereas because I have Joe as a partner and, we're working together, it was like, let's go. So, and for that, again, I'm grateful. Like that's one of the downsides of working for yourself. I will sometimes like hold back on things because I'm like, oh, I've got stuff going on in my personal life or things like that. And traditional employment would kind of push me. And so this gave me a push that I don't know that I would have given myself just because of how overwhelming everything was in 2020 and continues to be.
Yeah, it sounds like it was both accountability and a morale boost.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm so grateful. And the book was Joe's idea and he approached me to sign on as a co-writer. And I'm so grateful. I mean, what an incredible opportunity. And I get to have fun. That was another aspect of that I was very grateful for because we're specifically trying to make a humorous guide to money. And as I told people, I'm like, I don't know if it'll be funny, but Joe and I crack each other up. So like, as I'm writing, I'm like, oh, he's going to laugh at this. And so he was telling me yesterday, he's like, yeah, there was stuff that I was writing that I was specifically like, oh, I want Emily to laugh at this. And there's a couple where like, I'm surprised they didn't cut it. thought the editors would cut it because we were just trying to make each other laugh. But that is part of what is going to make this book appeal to other people. Like, presumably we're not the only two people who have the same sense of humor.
I would hope not. So I want to pivot back to the idea that you are the primary caretaker for your children. And obviously you had to have a conversation with your husband when you got this book deal in terms of how work and personal schedules were going to work. So tell me about some of the conversations that you had to have with him.
So, we didn't have one big conversation. It was probably more of like a series of little conversations. So some stuff, like, for a long, long time, I have basically been the person in charge of drop off and pick up for if the kids are going somewhere. So that did not matter in the spring of last year. But over the summer, they were going to day camp through our JCC, which did an incredible job of meeting all the CDC guidelines to make sure that it was going to be safe. And so we split drop off and pick up, which in part was because he's no longer at an office where he'd have to leave and come back. I mean, he's at home, so he leaves and gets the kids and comes back and can still do some work in his home office. So, like, there were things like that where it was just like, okay, we're going to have to split this because I'm going to need some more time. And if I'm spending an hour in the car every day just with drop off and pick up, that's not going to work. There was some conversation about, like, okay, this week we're going to be doing this over Zoom with the kids. Can you take this day? Can you take that day? And it was a little tough because the way that he would do stuff is not how I did it. So he'd set up his laptop in the same room with the kids with their Chromebooks, and he'd be trying to work. And I'm like, and in my head, I'm like, that's not working. And I don't know that it did work because, like, you kind of have to be there to be their teacher, even though their teacher is there on Zoom. But I also was busy enough that I couldn't, and I'm glad of this because it would have caused fights, that I wasn't there to be like, that's not going to work. So that worked. One thing that we have recently instituted is we've been doing a weekly meeting with the whole family. And so that's where we say, like, this is what's coming up this week. This is what you guys can expect, dentist appointment, or you've got swim lessons this day for the kids. But then that also gives me and my husband a chance to kind of talk about splitting up who does what, who's going to be doing what when. And so it went from this kind of assumption of I do all of the kid related stuff to, like, we discuss it. I still probably do more than 50% of the kid related stuff, but we talk about it ahead of time and it's not just a given. And so that kind of takes some of that mental load off of me, even though I'm still the one with the calendar, I'm still the one doing that, but I know that it's at least been discussed. And, even if my husband doesn't remember, my kids will. They'll be like, but I thought Daddy was going to do that, and that sort of thing.
Okay, so to clarify, the kids know which parent's going to do what responsibility?
Generally, yes.
Okay. And in terms of a system, do you write it down on a calendar? Is it somewhere where the family can see it, just so that there's a reminder for everyone, basically?
So yeah, when we do our weekly meeting, we have a dry erase board that we keep on the refrigerator. And so we fill that in with, like, what's coming up for the week. And in one of the things that we've also done with the weekly meeting is we ask the kids every week, like, what's the fun thing you want to do on the weekend? So, like, sometimes it'll be a movie night. Sometimes it'll be like, let's go sledding. And so they have that and know all week that they're looking forward to it. And so all of that is on the calendar that's on this dry erase board. So it's in a place for us to see. Now, again, I'll put stuff on the calendar, like, my older son has Hebrew school every Wednesday at 4:15, and I'll be out running errands and my husband will call me like, what time does Hebrew school start? I'm like, it's on the calendar. And it's also on the Google calendar. And then I've got a paper calendar up in my office. And it's one of those, I get it. It's faster for him to call me than to try to remember where it's put. But it's also just like, why am I keeping all these calendars?
So it sounds like almost enforcing some sort of boundary, like, so to speak, where I have these systems in place so that I can just delegate it if I need to. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. And that works about as well as it works. It's in modern marriages, there is this tendency and expectation that women are going to juggle it all. And I don't know how to fix that in my own individual situation, because if I don't, there are things that don't get done. And I mean, to be honest, there have been a couple of days where it'll be Wednesday. That's when my son has Hebrew school and it's over Zoom. And all of a sudden at like 6 p.m., I'm like, I forgot about Hebrew school, even though like this is part of the reason why I do this is so I don't forget. So like that happens. But the only thing we can do is make these incremental improvements and like have these conversations, these talks, and, you know, consistently try to make sure that this is something that we are all invested in. So it's not just me trying to hold everything up.
Right. So pivoting back to your book writing, and I'm going to assume Joe has to juggle his schedule as well. I think his child is older.
Yes, he has twins who are young adults. They're in their early 20s.
Right. So nonetheless, he would have to still find time to, because he does Stacking Benjamins High. That's a lot of work too, right? And then the book. And so was there any kind of challenges in terms of you trying to figure out your work schedule and how that works with your family, and then how it works with his schedule?
Yes. The way that we set it up was we each kind of took half the chapters. So like we volunteered, like, oh, I want to take that one. I want to take that one. And then we each wrote a first and maybe second draft of those chapters. Then we put everything together and like went over the chapters and then like did our next drafts together. So, you know, it started with like, I was looking at his chapters and kind of making suggestions and edits, and he was looking at mine. And then for the last 3 weeks before our deadline, we met every single day to discuss what we were going over and kind of go through things. And that was when it was real crunch time. And that was when like I was working from morning to night every day just to make sure that we got all the things done, all the edits in. And then this is, if you've met either of us, this should not be a surprise. We're 25,000 words over our required word count. And so we had to find 25,000 words to cut, which was painful.
Honestly, that's like another book right there.
Yeah. So, and like some of it was, my feeling is comedy is specific. So to make a joke, I would drill down and get really specific, but then that would take 3,000 words when I could make the same joke in 500. And so those sorts of things where like, you know, but you're going to cut my Engelbert Humperdinck joke. So those sorts of things and we had to work together on that to make sure that we were in agreement on what was getting cut. And it was a pretty massive undertaking for a few weeks. And that was when I was most just checked out from the family. We celebrate Shabbat every Friday night. And there was the Friday before it was due, I think it was, I came out, had dinner with them, and then went right back into the office to finish working because I was like, I got to get this done. I got to get this done.
Right. So it sounds like you had to adjust your boundaries and let your family know what was going on every step of the way. And of course, the last few weeks before that was due, it was, okay, like I just need to kind of step away from other responsibilities, is what I'm hearing.
Yes. And everyone, I mean, my kids missed me, but Jamie, my husband, was so supportive. He was like, no, I get it. Crunch time is crunch time. You know, take the time you need. And he took over for, you know, we switch off bedtime duty. And I think he took over for bedtime duty pretty much every night that week. Took care of like pick up and drop off both several times just to make sure that I had that uninterrupted time. Because that's the other aspect of it, is what I have to do for the kids is not necessarily that time consuming. It's just a matter of breaking your concentration to do it. There was a concept that I really appreciate about how women have what's known as time confetti, specifically mothers, where you do have free time, but it comes in these tiny, tiny little chunks. And so you can't really get anything done because you really need like an uninterrupted hour. And so I was thinking about like the time confetti of if I had to interrupt what I was doing to go pick up the kids in the afternoon, or if I'd had to interrupt what I was doing to find them a snack or that sort of thing, supervise toothbrushing. It's not that it takes that much time. It's just that it breaks the concentration. And then I got to come back and get back into that mindset to be able to continue working.
Right. And so now that I'm assuming your manuscript is in, I think the edits are coming soon, or are you in the editing stage?
We're in the editing stage right now.
Okay. So I am interested in the shift from like manuscript writing, submitting it. You're now in the editing stage. And of course, there's a lot of shifts with your family in terms of roles of what should be done and all those things. Have you noticed a shift in your kids in terms of them taking some of the responsibilities on themselves? I know they're still pretty young, but have you noticed any shifts as a result of all of this?
I don't know if I've seen any shifts. I know that the way that they interact with my work can be a little different. So my husband is an automotive engineer and he works for Harley Davidson. So like dad works on motorcycles and that's something like it's tangible. They understand that. For a long time, it's just like, well, mom works on the computer, didn't really. And so they know that I write and they know that I write about money. But when talking about a book, like their understanding of what it is that I do, and then there are things like we're going to have illustrations and stuff like that. So that's something that they can comprehend. And so like they've been asking me like, well, when are you going to write a book for kids? Because that kind of brings it into their sphere. So there's been kind of a shift in that way, in that they have a kind of a clearer understanding of what I do, and that it has important deadlines and things like that. We recently, their school is open. They're masked and have all kinds of things in place, but their school is open. And so I was dropping them off and they asked, who's picking us up today? I said, well, it's probably dad, but we can never know for sure. And they're like, and they know that because sometimes they'll be like, I thought dad was picking us up and I come get them. And they're like, well, why is that? I was like, well, my stuff never blows up. Like what I'm writing does not catch on fire, whereas that can and sometimes does happen with internal combustion engines. So there is that. I would say that I think things might be different if this weren't happening mid-pandemic as well. So there has been some kind of regression with my kids a little bit because they're suffering through, suffering is such a strong word, but they're dealing with all of this trauma too. So my eldest, like he knows he's got chores that he needs to do and is like Mr. Negotiation trying to get out of them. And that's not because he doesn't respect the work that I'm doing or anything like that. It's really just a matter of like, I got all this stuff I don't like. And then on top of that, I got to unload the dishwasher. Come on, mom.
All right. So as we're wrapping up, if you can pick one, what would you say has been the biggest lessons you've learned throughout the whole book writing process in terms of it like affecting you professionally and personally?
I think for me, what I've learned is that I need to prioritize my career in the same way that my husband prioritizes his. I make less than my husband does. And for when I first started freelancing, he had trouble seeing it as a legitimate career path just because it just didn't compute. I didn't get a paycheck and I wasn't getting a W-2. So what I learned from this is like, because of the circumstances, I prioritized my career in this situation, but I'm better off for having done that. And I need to make sure I do that even if I don't have the external pressures of a co-writer and a deadline and things like that. Whereas it would have been very easy for me to say, like, I'm stepping back, I'm overwhelmed. If the pandemic had hit a year earlier. So, and that's something that I think is very common for women, and something that I have said to people that is hard to internalize. I do some financial coaching, and there was a woman that I was working with who was feeling overwhelmed with what her kids needed and her job, and she was thinking about quitting her job. And my response to her was, do you want to make a permanent solution to a temporary problem? Because once your kids age, just 2 or 3 years, this is not going to be nearly as difficult. So like find a temporary solution. And so that's something, it's easy for me to see and say that to someone else. And it's very hard to internalize it. But that's the sort of thing where I think that as women in particular, we see these big problems and we're like, okay, well, let's take a big solution. And, sometimes it's outside of our control. But when it's within our control, let's make sure we're not making these permanent solutions to temporary problems, even if we don't know when the temporary problem is going to be over. We don't know when COVID's going to be over. But prioritizing your career, recognizing that is a long-term relationship that you have, and nurturing it even in difficult times is going to be better for you than continually sacrificing in order to make things temporarily easier.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Emily. So I know the book's not out yet, but where can everyone find you and your work until then?
So you can find me at emilyguyberken.com. And you can also find my previous 4 books anywhere books are sold, including Amazon. Those are The 5 Years Before You Retire, and I have an updated version coming out later this year. And my most recent book is End Financial Stress Now. You can also find me on Twitter. I love to say hi, at Emily Guy Birken.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Let's take a look at some lessons we can learn from my conversation with Emily. Lesson number 1 is to have multiple systems in place when it comes to your work and personal life. Now, for Emily, she had multiple calendars, a whiteboard, Google Calendars, all the things, and including meetings with her kids and her husband, so that she's not going to forget, even though I know she did sometimes, about the things that she had to do, her family had to do, and even her kids had to do. Even if you have very few tasks, it really doesn't matter. Have those multiple systems in place, and you're going to ensure that things are going to get done. Lesson number 2 is it's okay to put your career first. So as you heard in my conversation with Emily, she wishes she can prioritize her career much like her husband. And if that's something you want to do, if this is a season in your life where you really want to hustle and grow your brand or your writing career or your online business, whatever it may be, that's totally okay. The important thing is to be intentional about it and to make sure that you put steps in place that you can prioritize your career. And on that note, lesson number 3 is to get the right support systems in place. So for Emily, her and her husband were able to switch tasks, to prioritize different things here and there, and make sure that both their routines were that they can both do their work and also tend to their personal life and all the tasks in between. So maybe for you, that could be talking to your partner and make sure they're taking on some tasks that you normally do, or it could be eliminating some things, or it can even be outsourcing some tasks like hiring a virtual assistant if that's what needs to be done. Thank you so much for listening to the Plutus Awards Podcast. If you're interested in collaborating with other financial bloggers, podcasters, influencers, and more to chat about your work, interests, ask and answer questions, come join our Facebook community. Search for Plutus Community in the search bar or head to facebook.com/groups/Plutus Community. We hope to see you there and get a chance to support you and your amazing work.